Have you ever heard your own parents discuss a prison sentence with the casual tone of a grocery run? They told me 2 years in a minimum security facility was a small price to pay to save their favorite child. I realized then that I was not family to them. I was just a spare asset. But they forgot one thing about treating someone like a shadow for 33 years eventually. That shadow learns how to plunge the whole house into darkness. My name is Genesis Riley, and I was 33 years old when I realized that my parents did not see me as a daughter, but rather as a depreciating asset they were finally ready to liquidate. The call had come at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was not a request. My mother, Celeste, did not ask if I was busy or if I was working. She simply told me there was a family emergency and that my presence was required immediately at the estate in Briar Ridge. That was how the Rileys operated. They did not schedule. They summoned. I drove the 40 minutes from my cramped apartment in East Harbor to the manicured, gated silence of Briar Ridge, with a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. It was a familiar feeling, one I had carried since childhood, the distinct sensation of being a foreign object in my own home. When I walked into the living room, the air was cold. My father kept the thermostat set to 68 degrees year-round, a temperature that preserved the expensive leather furniture and the heavy drapes, but made human skin prickle. Graham Riley sat at the head of the mahogany coffee table, his posture rigid, his face composed into the same mask he wore when he was about to fire a vice president. My mother sat on the velvet sofa, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed, but her makeup miraculously intact, and there, curled into her side like a wounded animal, was my younger sister, Delaney. Delaney was 27. She was the golden child, the vibrant splash of color in our beige existence. She was currently engaged to Trent Halbrook, a union that was less of a marriage and more of a merger between two dynasties. The wedding was 3 months away. The invitations had been embossed with gold leaf. The venue in the Hamptons had been secured with a deposit that cost more than my husband and I made in a year. "Sit down, Genesis," my father said. He did not look at me. He was looking at a thick manila folder resting on the table in front of him. I sat in the stiff wingback chair opposite them. I kept my knees together and my hands in my lap. I learned a long time ago that taking up space in this house was an offense. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, though the atmosphere suggested a funeral. Graham placed a hand on the folder and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my fingertips. "Open it." I reached out. The folder was heavy. Inside, I found a chaotic stack of papers that made my stomach drop. There were IRS notifications stamped with urgent warnings. There were bank statements from a business account I recognized as Delaney's boutique lifestyle brand, Laney Life. There were photocopies of wire transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. Moving from a charity fund my mother managed directly into Delaney's business, and from there, into personal accounts that had been drained at luxury resorts, high-end car dealerships, and casinos. It was not just bad bookkeeping. It was fraud. It was embezzlement. It was grand larceny. I looked up, my throat dry. "Delaney, what is this?" Delaney let out a sob that sounded like a hiccup. She buried her face in our mother's shoulder. Celeste stroked her hair, whispering soothing nonsense, glaring at me as if I were the one who had committed the crime simply by reading the evidence. "She made a mistake," Celeste said, her voice trembling with protective fury. "She was under pressure, the wedding planning, the business launch. She just borrowed some resources to keep things afloat. She meant to put it back." "This isn't borrowing." "Mom," I said, my voice quiet. I pointed to a tax document. "This is tax evasion, and this transfer here. This is piercing the corporate veil. This is federal prison time." "We know what it is," Graham snapped. His voice cut through the room like a whip. "We have already spoken to the lawyers. The investigation is in the preliminary stages, but indictments are coming. If this goes public, the Halbrooks will walk, Trent will call off the wedding, the merger of our reputations will die, Delaney will be ruined." I looked at the papers again. The dates went back 4 years. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a lifestyle funded by theft. So fix it, I said, feeling a cold detachment settle over me. Pay it back. Settle with the IRS. You have the money. It is not about the money anymore, Graham said. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. It is about the criminal charges. Someone has to take the fall for the intent. The prosecutor wants a body. They want a conviction to show they are tough on white-collar crime. I frowned, confused. So you hire the best defense team in the state and you fight it? Graham shook his head slowly. No. If Delaney is charged, even if she is acquitted, the scandal destroys her. She is the face of the brand. She is the future Mrs. Halbrook. She cannot have a mugshot. He paused. And for the first time, he looked me directly in the eyes. His gaze was flat, assessing, completely devoid of affection. It was the look a butcher gives a piece of meat, deciding where to make the cut. That is why you are going to do it, he said. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I could hear the soft, wet sound of Delaney sniffing. Excuse me, I whispered. We have arranged a narrative, Graham continued, as if discussing a zoning permit. You were the bookkeeper for Laney Life. You handled the taxes. You managed the accounts. You moved the money without Delaney's knowledge to cover your own bad investments. Delaney was the victim of a jealous, incompetent older sister. I stared at him. The air left my lungs. You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit? It is the only way, Celeste chimed in, her voice pleading but her eyes hard. Genesis, look at your sister. She is fragile. She cannot survive prison. She has a life ahead of her. The Halbrook wedding is everything we have worked for. And I don't have a life, I asked. My voice sounded strange, thin and high. Let's be realistic. Genesis, Graham said. He opened his hands, a gesture of brutal honesty. You are 33. You live in a rental in East Harbor. You are married to a mechanic. You have no social standing, no reputation to protect. You are invisible. He said it without malice, which made it worse. He said it as a fact, like stating the sky was blue. 2 years, Graham said. That is what the lawyers think we can plead it down to. 2 years in a minimum security facility. It is not real prison. Genesis, it is a camp. You read books. You work in the garden. 2 years in prison won't kill you. I looked at Delaney. She was watching me now, one eye visible from behind her hair. She wasn't crying anymore. She was waiting. There was no apology in her face, just expectation. She'd been breaking things her whole life, and I had been the one handing her the glue. She assumed this was just a bigger bottle of glue. And in exchange, I asked, I needed to hear the price tag they put on my freedom. We take care of you, Graham said quickly. When you get out, we set you up. A house, a real house, not that box you live in, a trust fund. You and Norman will never have to worry about bills again. You sacrifice 2 years, and you buy yourself a lifetime of security. Think of it as a job, Celeste added. A very high-paying job. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to stand up and flip the heavy mahogany table. I wanted to scream until the crystal chandelier shook. I wanted to vomit on their Persian rug, but I didn't. I had spent 33 years learning to repress my emotions in this house. Any display of anger was met with cold shoulders. Any tears were mocked as weakness. If I exploded now, they would simply treat me like a hysteric. They would bully me, gaslight me, and wear me down until I signed whatever they wanted. I needed to get out of that room. I forced my hands to tremble. It wasn't hard. My whole body was vibrating with shock. I lowered my head, letting my shoulders slump in a posture of defeat. I let my voice crack. I don't know. 2 years, Graham. It will go by fast, he pressed, sensing the weakness. We will hire you a consultant. They will teach you how to handle it. You are tough. Genesis, you have always been the tough one. Tough. That was their code word for unloved. Delaney was delicate, so she needed protection. I was tough, so I could be discarded. I need time, I whispered. I can't. I can't say yes right now. I need to talk to Norman. No, Graham said sharply. You cannot tell Norman the truth yet. If he knows, he might do something stupid. You tell him you are in trouble. You tell him you made a mistake. You get him on board with the narrative. I need 24 hours, I said, looking up with wide, watery eyes. Please, just let me sleep on it. I need to wrap my head around it. It's prison. Dad? Graham exchanged a look with Celeste. They saw what they wanted to see: a broken woman looking for a way to be a hero, or perhaps just a coward looking for a gentle push. 24 hours, Graham agreed. He closed the folder. Tomorrow night, we will have the lawyers here with the plea deal paperwork. You sign, and we transfer the first installment of the payment into an escrow account for you. Okay, I breathed. Okay. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I walked to the door, passing Delaney. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Her palm was warm and damp. Thank you, Jen, she whispered. I knew you'd save me. You always do. I pulled my hand away, pretending I was wiping a tear, but really I just couldn't bear the sensation of her skin against mine. I walked out of the house. I walked down the stone path, past the fountain that cost more than my college tuition, and got into my 6-year-old sedan. I started the engine. I drove through the iron gates and didn't look back. I did not go home. I couldn't face Norman. My husband was a good man, a simple man who believed in hard work and bad luck. He loved me. If I told him what they asked, he would drive his truck through their front door, and as satisfying as that sounded, it wouldn't save me. It would just get us both destroyed. My father had better lawyers than we had friends. I drove for 20 minutes until I found a diner on the edge of the highway. One of those places with fluorescent lights that hummed and menus sticky with syrup. I parked in the back, near the dumpster, where the shadows were deep. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence. I waited for the tears. I waited for the hysterical sobbing that should come when your parents tell you that you are worth less than a wedding reception. I waited for the grief of realizing that the people who gave you life were willing to consume it to feed their vanity. But the tears did not come. Instead, a strange clarity washed over me. It was cold and sharp, like the air in my father's living room. I thought about the last 33 years, the missed birthdays, the way they forgot to help me with college tuition while buying Delaney a condo, the way they criticized my clothes, my job, my husband. I had always thought I was just failing to meet their standards. I thought if I worked harder, if I was more successful, if I was better, they would finally look at me the way they looked at her. But tonight, in that living room, the equation had finally balanced. They didn't hate me. Hate requires passion. They felt nothing for me. To Graham and Celeste Riley, I was not a person. I was an insurance policy. I was a spare kidney kept on ice, just in case the main one failed. And now that the main one was failing, they were ready to harvest me. 2 years won't kill you, he had said. He was right, but he was wrong about why. It wouldn't kill me because I was already dead to them. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my laptop bag. I didn't work as a bookkeeper. My parents thought I was a mid-level clerk at a boring logistics firm because that was the only way I could keep them out of my business. I let them believe I was mediocre because mediocrity was safe. But I wasn't a clerk. I was a senior asset recovery specialist for the Marrow Slate Compliance Group. My job was not filing papers. My job was forensic auditing. I spent 50 hours a week hunting down hidden assets, tracing shell companies, and exposing people who thought they were smarter than the banking system. I found money that people tried very hard to hide. I reconstructed financial realities from shredded documents and deleted emails. My parents thought the world ran on prestige and handshakes. They didn't know the world actually ran on data. And data was the one thing that never lied. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark car, illuminating my face. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I navigated to the credit bureau portal. I had a suspicion, a dark, sinking feeling that the folder on Graham's table was only the tip of the iceberg. If they were willing to send me to prison to fix a problem, what else had they done to me while I wasn't looking? My fingers flew across the keyboard. I entered my social security number. I entered my identifying details. I bypassed the two-factor authentication I had set up on my phone. The loading circle spun for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the daughter I had been the one who wanted their approval, the one who craved their love, died in the front seat of that sedan. And when the screen loaded, the woman who took her place was ready to go to war. To understand why I sat in a freezing car behind a 24-hour diner, staring at a laptop screen like it was a bomb detonator, you have to understand the mathematics of my marriage. I lived in East Harbor with my husband, Norman Pierce. We did not live in the nice part of East Harbor where the developers were putting up glass condos and artisanal coffee shops. We lived in the part where the streetlights flickered and the potholes were old enough to vote. Our apartment was a third-floor walk-up with a radiator that banged like a prisoner demanding release and a view of a brick wall that wept moisture whenever it rained. Norman was a mechanic. He came home every evening with grease permanently etched into the whorls of his fingerprints and the smell of gasoline clinging to his work boots. He was a good man. He was the kind of man who would drive 20 minutes out of his way to return a wallet he found. Even if we were 3 days late on the electric bill, we lived our life on a ledger that was always bleeding red ink. We tracked every cent. We knew that if we bought the good brand of orange juice on Tuesday, we were eating plain rice on Thursday. We kept the thermostat at 62 degrees in the winter and wore sweaters indoors. We did not go out to dinner. We did not take vacations. We were the invisible working class of America, the people who kept the engines running while the rest of the world drove by, and while Norman scrubbed oil from his hands with gritty soap, worrying about the rising cost of rent. My sister Delaney was living a life that defied the laws of physics. I knew this because I followed her on Instagram. Everyone did. She had 40,000 followers who hung on her every post. I would sit on our secondhand couch, wrapped in a blanket to save heat, and scroll through her feed. There was Delaney in Tulum, wearing a swimsuit that cost more than my car insurance. Caption, recharging the soul. There was Delaney in Aspen, holding a glass of champagne in a hot tub. Caption, work hard, play hard. There were photos of her business trips to Milan and Paris for her lifestyle brand, Laney Life, a company that sold overpriced candles and yoga mats to women who had too much money and not enough sense. Norman would look over my shoulder sometimes, shaking his head. He would say that she was lucky. He would say that some people were just born under a bright star, and we were born under a heavy cloud. He believed the lie because he was honest. He could not conceive of a world where money appeared without labor. He thought Delaney was a brilliant entrepreneur because that is what my parents told everyone, but I knew better, even before tonight. Deep down, I knew. The margins on artisanal candles did not pay for first-class flights to Dubai. The revenue from a startup boutique did not cover a penthouse lease in the city and a closet full of Italian leather. The math did not work. My parents, Graham and Celeste, made sure the math remained a mystery. They also made sure I remained a mystery, even to my husband, to my family, and by extension to Norman. I was a mid-level clerk at a logistics firm. I told them I filed shipping manifests and processed invoices. I told them my job was boring, repetitive, and dead-end. I let them believe I was mediocre because mediocrity was the best camouflage. If you are boring, people stop asking questions. If you are struggling, people stop expecting things from you. The truth was a secret I kept locked in a fireproof box in my mind. I was a senior asset recovery specialist for Marrow and Slate Compliance Group. I did not file shipping manifests. I hunted people. My clients were banks, hedge funds, and federal agencies who needed to find money that had vanished. I spent my days tracing wire transfers through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I analyzed forensic accounting data to find the one discrepancy in 1,000 pages of ledger entries that proved a CEO was buying yachts with pension funds. I was not a clerk. I was a bloodhound. I could look at a spreadsheet and smell the fear. Norman did not know this because I could not tell him. If I told him that I made a six-figure salary, I would have to explain why we were living in poverty. And the reason we were living in poverty was that I was aggressively paying down a mountain of debt that I had mysteriously acquired in my early 20s student loans that seemed to balloon. Credit cards I barely remembered using but assumed I had been irresponsible with during college. I was punishing myself for a financial past I could not quite recall. Living in penance, trying to clear the slate so we could finally breathe. Besides, if my parents knew what I really did, if they knew their failure of a daughter was actually one of the sharpest forensic auditors in the state, they would have been terrified. Criminals do not like living with detectives. I remembered a Tuesday 3 years ago. It was the only time I broke my rule and asked them for help. I needed $4,000. It was a fee to obtain a specialized certification in forensic digital analysis, a credential that would have bumped my salary significantly and allowed me to take on private consulting work. We were drowning in medical bills from when Norman broke his arm, and I did not have the cash. I went to Briar Ridge. I sat in that same living room where they had just sentenced me to prison. I asked my father for a loan. I offered to pay interest. I presented a repayment plan. Graham had sighed, looking at me with that disappointed weariness he perfected. He told me that liquidity was tight. He told me that the market was down and their assets were tied up in long-term holds. He gave me a lecture on living within my means. He said that handouts would only make me weaker. He said no. I drove home crying that day. I told Norman I couldn't get the certification. We ate pasta with butter for 2 weeks to save money. 6 days after that meeting, Delaney posted a photo on Instagram. She was standing next to a brand new convertible, a birthday gift from Mom and Dad. The caption read, "My parents are literally the best. So blessed. That car cost $60,000. I realized then that it was not about liquidity, it was about value. Investing in me was like throwing money into a black hole. I was the shadow, the background noise. Investing in Delaney was investing in the family brand. She was the show pony, I was the stable hand. I sat in the dark car behind the diner, the memory burning in my chest like acid. I had let it go back then. I had swallowed the hurt because I thought they just didn't care. But the meeting tonight had changed the lighting on the stage. 2 years won't kill you, my father had said. No one looks at you. They were not just dismissing me. They were banking on my invisibility. They needed me to be the failure. My struggle was necessary for their success. If I was successful, if I was credible, I couldn't be the scapegoat. They needed Genesis Riley to be the messy, incompetent, desperate sister, so that Delaney Riley could remain the pristine, successful genius. My entire life, my poverty, my struggle. It wasn't just bad luck. It was structural engineering. They had built my life to be a cage so they could use me when the time came. But why was the cage so secure? The question nagged at me. My professional brain, the part of me that tracked embezzlers and fraudsters, finally kicked into gear. Graham had been too confident. He had the paperwork ready. He said the lawyers had already constructed the narrative I was the jealous sister who cooked the books. To make that narrative stick to a prosecutor, you need more than just a confession. You need a pattern. You need a history of financial instability. You need a motive that looks evident on paper. I opened a new tab on my browser. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. I was not a daughter anymore. I was an auditor approaching a crime scene. I navigated to the National Credit Bureau portal. I knew the system inside and out. I used it every day to profile targets. I typed in my social security number. I typed in my date of birth. I answered the security questions, my first pet, the street I grew up on. I hit enter. The screen refreshed. I expected to see my mediocre score. I expected to see the lingering student loans and the credit cards I was slowly paying off. What I saw made the air leave the car. The dashboard was a sea of red. My credit score was not mediocre. It was catastrophic. It was in the low 400s. But that wasn't what made my vision blur. It was the list of active accounts. There were 7 credit cards open in my name that I did not have in my wallet. They were maxed out. $50,000, $80,000. There was a business loan taken out 4 years ago in my name for a shell company called GR Consulting. It was in default. There were inquiries from high-risk lenders. And there, at the bottom of the active liabilities, was a massive line of credit attached to Laney Life. I stared at the screen, scrolling down, my eyes widening with every line item. The dates matched perfectly. The business loan was taken out the week I moved out of the house. The credit cards were opened in batches over the last 5 years. They had been using my identity as a dumping ground for toxic debt. They had been ruining my name systematically, month by month, year by year. I wasn't just a scapegoat for the current crisis. I had been their financier all along. Delaney's trips, her clothes, her success. It wasn't just funded by stolen charity money. It was funded by loans taken out in my name. They had not just decided to sacrifice me tonight, they had been bleeding me dry for a decade. I clicked on the details for the largest business loan, the one that was currently 120 days past due. I needed to see the contact information. I needed to see where the statements were being sent. The address on file was a P.O. box in Briar Ridge, and then I saw it, the guarantor section. Usually, a guarantor is a cosigner, someone who vouches for the borrower, the name listed as the secondary contact, the person authorized to discuss the account. Was not Graham Riley, it was not Celeste. The name typed in the field was Norman Pierce. I froze. The neon light from the diner sign reflected off the screen, turning the white background into a sickly pink. Norman, my Norman, the man who counted coupons for oat milk, the man who held my hand when I cried about not being able to afford a vacation. Why was his name on a fraudulent loan that fueled my sister's company? There was no signature visible on this summary screen, just the data entry. But his name was there. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, trying to find a way that this was a mistake. But in my line of work, we do not believe in mistakes. We believe in data, and the data said that my husband was somehow tethered to the very machinery that was crushing us. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to close my eyes. It was one thing to be betrayed by parents who never loved you. That was a tragedy. But it was an old tragedy. But this was a new kind of knife. I took a screenshot. I saved the page. I created a new folder on my desktop. I did not name it family. I did not name it finance. I named it evidence. I looked out at the empty parking lot. The world looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. But everything had changed. I was not just fighting a prison sentence anymore. I was standing in the center of a conspiracy that had been running for years, and everyone I knew was holding a shovel. I closed the laptop. The snap of the lid sounded like a gunshot in the quiet car. If they wanted me to take the blame, they had made a severe miscalculation. They thought they were sending a sheep to the slaughter. They did not know they had just handed the butcher knife to the only person who knew how to use it. I put the car in gear. I was not going home to cry to my husband. I was not going back to my parents to beg. I had work to do. My hands were not shaking anymore. They had gone past shaking into a state of unnatural stillness, the kind of rigor that sets in when the body goes into survival mode. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the engine idling, the air conditioner blowing cold air that I could not feel because my blood had already turned to ice. The laptop screen was the only source of light in the car. Casting a harsh, clinical blue glow over the dashboard, I was looking at a digital crime scene. Most people look at a credit report and see a score. They see a number between 300 and 850 that tells them if they can buy a house or if they are doomed to rent forever. But I was not most people. I was a forensic auditor. I looked at a credit report and I saw a timeline. I saw a narrative. I saw a psychological profile of the spender. And what I was looking at now was an autobiography of my sister's greed. Ghost written in my name, I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I needed to be clinical. I needed to treat this like a case file at Marrow and Slate. I clicked on the first tab, Open Revolving Accounts. The list populated, and it was longer than my grocery list. There were 5 premium credit cards, a platinum card, a Sapphire Reserve, a luxury retail card for a department store where a pair of socks cost more than my weekly food budget. I clicked on the transaction history for the Platinum card. It had been opened 4 years ago. The limit was $50,000. The current balance was $49,812. I scrolled through the statements. The charges were a map of Delaney's life. There was the trip to Cabo San Lucas for her 25th birthday. The airline tickets were first class. The hotel was a 5-star resort. I remembered that trip. She had posted about it incessantly. She had captioned a photo of herself on a yacht with the phrase self-made. She had paid for that yacht with a card issued in my name. I looked at the payment history. Minimum payments only. Just enough to keep the account from going into charge-off status. Just enough to keep the creditors from sending a sheriff to my door. But not enough to ever lower the principal. The interest charges alone were staggering. Compounding daily at 24%. It was financial slavery. I moved to the next item, installment loans. There was a business loan for $150,000. The lender was a high-risk venture capital fund that specialized in lending to startups with bad credit, provided they had collateral. The loan was attached to Laney Life, LLC. I clicked the details. The loan was in default. It had been in default for 6 months. The entire principal was due immediately. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. This was why Graham was so desperate. This was why they needed me in prison. It was not just about the embezzlement from the charity. It was about the entire house of cards collapsing. If I went to prison, my credit would be the least of my worries. I would be a convicted felon. These debts would just be another part of the ruin. They could let the loan default, let the bank sue me. And since I would be in a cell, I would not be there to defend myself. They would wash their hands of the debt and the daughter in one stroke. But how had they intercepted the mail? How had they stopped the collections agents from calling my phone? I clicked on the contact information tab associated with the delinquent business loan. The primary address was a post office box in Briar Ridge. I recognized the box number. It was the one my father used for his consulting business. The primary phone number ended in 4099. That was my mother's cell phone. The primary email address was genesis.riley.finance@gmail.com. I stared at the address. It looked legitimate. It had my name in it, but I had never created that account. I opened a new browser window and typed the email address into a recovery tool. I asked it to send a password reset code. My phone did not buzz. Instead, the screen masked the recovery number code sent to phone ending in 4099. My mother, Celeste, had created an email account in my name. She was receiving my bills. She was receiving the collections notices. She was likely replying to them, pretending to be me, making promises to pay, stalling for time. I closed my eyes, and a memory hit me so hard it made me gasp. 3 years ago, a Sunday dinner, the roast beef was dry, and the conversation was stiff. My mother had pulled me aside into the kitchen. She had been so sweet, so attentive. She had asked me about my mail. She said, "Genesis, darling, you live in such a rough neighborhood. I worry about package thieves. Why don't you forward your important mail to our P.O. box? It is so much safer. We can just hold it for you." I had been touched. I thought she cared about my safety. I thought she was being a mother. I had signed the change of address form right there at the kitchen island. I wasn't protecting my mail. I was handing them the keys to my identity. And then there was the final blow. I went back to the business loan details. I needed to see the guarantor documents. A loan of that size for a startup with no revenue required a personal guarantee. I assumed my father had forged my signature. I downloaded the PDF of the original application. The document opened. There was my name, Genesis Riley, listed as the primary borrower, and there, listed as secondary contact and spousal concurrence, was another name, Norman Pierce. The air in the car seemed to vanish. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the name until the letters started to swim. Norman, my husband, the man who was currently sitting in our drafty apartment, probably worrying that I had been in an accident because I hadn't come home yet. The man who held me when I cried about my stagnant career. The man who cursed the rich people in Briar Ridge for how they treated me. His name was on the loan application. It was not a signature, it was typed. It was listed under a section called Spousal Awareness and Emergency Contact, but his social security number was there. I felt a sensation like cold water being poured down my spine. How did they get Norman's social security number? I cast my mind back, searching through the years of our marriage. Looking for the leak. 2 years ago, we were trying to switch car insurance providers to save $15 a month. My father had offered to help. He said he had a broker who could get us a family bundle rate. He asked for our information. He said he needed Norman's details to run the quote. Norman had hesitated. He was proud. He didn't like taking favors from Graham, but I had pushed him. I had said, "Please, Norman, it is just a quote. If we can save money, we should do it." I had handed my father the piece of paper with Norman's social security number on it, and Graham had never gotten us that insurance quote. He had said the broker fell through. He hadn't used the number for insurance. He had used it to list Norman as a backup on a fraudulent loan. I sat back against the headrest, feeling a profound, hollowing grief. It was a physical pain, an ache in the center of my chest where my heart used to be. They hadn't just stolen my credit. They hadn't just stolen my name. They had weaponized my marriage. If this loan went to court, and I claimed identity theft, the bank would pull up this document. They would see Norman's information. They would say, "Your husband was listed. He knew. You both knew." They had framed us both. They had set it up so that if I ever tried to sink them, I would have to drag Norman down with me. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was nearly midnight. I imagined my parents back in Briar Ridge. They were probably sleeping soundly. They had delivered the ultimatum. They believed they had won. They thought Genesis, the weak, invisible daughter, was currently crying in her apartment, terrifying her husband into agreeing to the plea deal. They thought I was breaking, but I wasn't breaking. I was calcifying. I felt the last drop of hope evaporate from my body. You don't realize how much hope you carry until it's gone. I had carried a secret, stupid hope that one day, if I was good enough, if I took enough abuse, if I stayed quiet enough, they would love me. I hoped that the cruelty was just a misunderstanding. But you don't take out a $150,000 loan in the name of someone you love. You don't frame someone you love for a federal crime. They didn't love me. They were parasites, and I was the host. I sat up straight. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I created a new folder on my desktop. I typed the name in all caps, evidence. I started screenshotting. I took a picture of the credit card list. Click. I took a picture of the payment history showing the transfers from my mother's account paying the minimums. Click. I took a picture of the recovery email linked to my mother's phone. Click. I took a picture of the loan application with Norman's stolen data. Click. I downloaded the metadata for the files, showing the IP addresses from which the applications were submitted. I knew those IP addresses. They belonged to the Wi-Fi network at the Briar Ridge estate. I worked for an hour. I built a dossier that was cleaner, sharper, and more damning than anything I had ever produced for a client. This was not just a credit report. It was an indictment. It was a map of 10 years of systematic abuse. When I was finished, I backed the folder up to an encrypted cloud server. Then I copied it to an external hard drive I kept in my bag. I closed the laptop. I looked out at the dark parking lot. The diner sign flickered, buzzing like a dying insect. My phone rang. It was Norman. I stared at his name on the screen. I couldn't answer him. Not yet. I couldn't hear his voice and lie to him, and I couldn't tell him the truth yet, because the truth was too big, too dangerous. If he knew what they had done to him, he would go to their house tonight. He would get arrested, and then we would both lose. I let it go to voicemail. I needed to be smarter than them. I needed to be colder than them. They wanted me to be the villain. I would be the villain. But I would be the kind of villain who wrote the ending of the story. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked dark, hollow, but dry. If they want me to take the blame, I whispered to the empty car, my voice steady and low, they will have to sign their own destruction. I put the car in reverse. I wasn't going to prison, and I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I was going to audit them. and I was going to make sure the balance due cost them everything. I did not go back to the office at Marrow and Slate. Accessing personal family records on company servers would have flagged a conflict of interest violation immediately, and the last thing I needed was to lose my license before I had even begun to fight. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour co-working space in the downtown district, a place called The Hub, where freelancers and insomniacs rented glass-walled pods by the hour. I paid for a private room with cash. I bought 3 black coffees from the vending machine. I set up my laptop, connected my external hard drive, and pulled a rolling whiteboard into the center of the small, sterile room. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a forensic audit. I took a marker and wrote 3 names at the top of the board: Graham, Celeste, Delaney. Then, at the bottom, I wrote my own name. I drew a circle around it. In the world of financial crime, the person in the circle is the beneficial owner, the one who takes the profit. But in this diagram, the circle represented the fall guy, the person left holding the bag when the music stopped. I cracked my knuckles and began to dig. I had the list of credit cards and the business loan I had discovered in the car. But that was just the surface damage. I needed to see the engine room. I used my credentials, the ones my parents didn't know I had, to access public record databases and cross-reference them with the bank statements I had managed to pull from the shared family cloud storage I still had access to. My mother was terrible with passwords. She used the same variation of Delaney's birthday for everything. It took me less than 10 minutes to get into the back end of the Laney Life accounting software. What I found was not a business. It was a hemorrhage. I started tracing the outflows first. A legitimate business spends money on inventory, marketing, and payroll. Laney Life was spending money on lifestyle maintenance. I found a recurring monthly transfer of $4,000 to a company called Velvet Sky Travel. I pulled the invoices. They were not for business trips. They were for first-class upgrades, private villa rentals in the Caribbean, and, on one occasion, a chartered helicopter ride to a winery in Napa Valley. Delaney had posted that helicopter ride on Instagram with the hashtag #HustleCulture. I found charges for office furniture totaling $25,000. When I cross-referenced the delivery address, it wasn't the rented studio space Delaney used for the brand. It was her private apartment in the city. She had furnished her entire living space with Italian leather and mid-century modern pieces, then written it off as a business expense on a loan that was under my name. It was reckless. It was the kind of spending you see from someone who knows they will never have to pay the bill. It was spending without consequence. She was driving a car at 100 miles an hour, and she had not just taken her foot off the brake. She had cut the brake lines. But the spending was just greed. I was looking for the mechanism. I turned my attention to the inflows. Where was the money coming from to pay the minimums on these massive debts? Delaney's brand sold candles and yoga mats. But the sales figures were pathetic. She was making maybe $2,000 a month in legitimate revenue. Yet the accounts showed inflows of 10 times that amount. I traced a series of deposits labeled consulting fees and grant disbursements. They were coming from a single source, the Briar Ridge Community Improvement Fund. I stopped typing. The room was cold, but I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. The Briar Ridge Community Improvement Fund was a local charity. It raised money for park maintenance, historical preservation, and scholarships for underprivileged kids. It was respectable. It was old money. And my mother, Celeste Riley, was the honorary chairwoman. I pulled the public tax filings for the charity. They were clean on the surface, but when I looked at the vendor list, I saw a company called Archway Solutions. The charity paid Archway Solutions $5,000 a month for strategic advising. I switched tabs and ran a search on Archway Solutions. It was a shell company registered in Delaware. The registered agent was a generic legal service, but I dug deeper, looking for the banking details. The bank account for Archway Solutions automatically swept 90% of its balance every month into the business account for Laney Life. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. I drew a line from Celeste to the charity, a line from the charity to Archway Solutions, a line from Archway to Delaney. It was a washing machine. My mother was taking charitable donations money from our neighbors. from the local elite siphoning it into a shell company, and then funneling it to Delaney to pay for her fake life. This wasn't just tax fraud. This was embezzlement of nonprofit funds. This was the kind of thing that put you on the front page of the newspaper in handcuffs. But there was one loose end. Where did my father fit in? Graham Riley was too controlling to just be a spectator. I went back to the Laney life expenditures. I looked for outliers. Most of the money went to travel, clothes, and restaurants. But there was one massive payment made 6 months ago, $32,000. The payee was Apex Custom Cabinetry. The memo line read, "Facility upgrades. Kitchen." Laney. Life was an online brand. It didn't have a kitchen. It didn't have a facility. I pulled the invoice from the system. I looked at the service address. It wasn't Delaney's apartment. It wasn't the studio. The address was 4402 Oakwood Lane, Briar Ridge, my parents' house. I stared at the screen, my mouth tasting like copper. My parents had renovated their kitchen, the chef's kitchen, with the marble islands and the imported wolf range that they loved to show off at dinner parties, and they had paid for it using the fraudulent business loan taken out in my name. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, a dark, jagged sound. They weren't just protecting Delaney, they were eating at the trough too. They had used my credit, my financial future, to buy themselves a new kitchen. They were all in on it. It was a family ecosystem of parasitism. Delaney was the face, the golden child who needed to shine. My parents were the backstage managers, directing the flow of stolen cash, and I was the foundation. I was the dirt they built the stage on. I went to the whiteboard and drew a thick red line from the kitchen invoice to Graham and Celeste. The picture was complete. But it was missing one crucial element: intent. To prove fraud in court, you have to prove that they intended to deceive. You have to prove that I didn't authorize this. I sat back down and opened the file for the massive business loan again, the one with Norman listed as the guarantor. I looked at the date the loan was originated. October 12th, 2 years ago. The date triggered a memory, sharp and specific. October 12th was the day I took the Certified Fraud Examiner exam. It was the biggest test of my career. I had studied for 6 months. I had been a wreck of nerves. I remembered that day perfectly. I had turned my phone off at 7 in the morning. I had been in a testing center with no electronics allowed for 6 hours. I had come out exhausted. My brain fried. I checked the timestamp on the loan application digital signature, 10:15 in the morning. I was in a locked room with a proctor when I supposedly signed a document authorizing a $150,000 loan from my laptop. I remembered something else about that day. The day before the exam, my father had called me. He had been unusually kind. He asked me if I was nervous. He asked me for my laptop password because he said he wanted to send me a digital good luck card that required administrator access to install some nonsense about a video greeting. I was so stressed, so desperate for his approval, and so distracted by the studying that I had given it to him. I thought he was finally trying to connect with me. He wasn't connecting. He was phishing me. He needed my IP address and my device fingerprint to make the loan application look legitimate to the bank's fraud algorithms. They had planned it. They waited for the one day they knew I would be off the grid, the one day I would be too distracted to check my notifications. I looked at the whiteboard. The map of greed was terrifying in its clarity, but then the cold logic of my profession kicked in, and with it came a terrifying realization. If I took this to the police right now, what would they see? They would see a loan in my name. They would see an email address with my name. They would see a device fingerprint from a laptop I owned. They would see that the money went to my sister, and they might think we were in it together. Or worse, my parents would stick to their script. They would say I was the rogue accountant, the jealous sister who set all this up to buy Delaney's love, or to frame her, on paper. I looked guilty. That was the brilliance of their plan. They had built the frame around me so tight that any attempt to break out would just make me look like I was struggling against the cuffs. I couldn't just go to the cops. I couldn't just file a report. It wasn't enough. It would be my word against the combined weight of the Riley and Halbrook reputations. I needed a document that looked like salvation to them, but was actually a trap door. I began to type. I wasn't writing a confession. I was drafting a legal agreement. I used the templates from my firm's database asset protection trusts, liability waivers, custodial agreements. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I was going to offer to take the fall. I was going to offer to protect their assets from the inevitable investigation. Greed is a blinder. If you dangle a piece of gold in front of a greedy man, he won't look at the rope tied around his ankle. My parents were terrified of losing their money. They were terrified of losing the house. If I offered them a way to hide the house and the assets under my control temporarily, of course, just to keep the government from seizing it when I went to prison, they would sign. They would sign anything to keep their wealth safe. And in signing that transfer, in signing the document that acknowledged I was taking control to protect them from the consequences of the fraud, they would be implicitly admitting that there was fraud and that they were party to it. I worked through the night. I drafted a transfer of asset control. I drafted a liability assumption agreement. I made the language dense, filled with the kind of legalese that makes rich people feel secure because it sounds expensive. By the time the sun started to come up over the city skyline, painting the glass walls of the co-working space in shades of gray and orange, I had a stack of documents an inch thick. I stood up and stretched. My back ached. My eyes were burning. I looked at the whiteboard one last time. Delaney, Graham, Celeste. They had spent 30 years treating me like a disposable asset. They thought I was a zero on their balance sheet. I wiped the board clean, erasing their names with a single swipe of the felt eraser. They were about to find out that a zero, when placed in the right column, changes the value of everything. I packed my laptop. I had a meeting to arrange. I needed a notary. But not just any notary. I needed a mobile notary. Someone who didn't ask questions. Someone who just verified identities and stamped the page. I needed a witness who would be invisible until the moment she became the most important person in the room. I walked out of the building into the cool morning air. I felt dangerous. I felt like a loaded gun. Tonight, I was going back to Briar Ridge, and I wasn't going there to surrender. I was going there to close the deal. The sun was fully up now, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished concrete floor of the co-working space. But my mind was still operating in the cold clarity of the middle of the night. I had spent the last 3 hours doing a forensic autopsy on my parents' financial life, and the results were more catastrophic than I had imagined. I had assumed they were greedy. I had not realized they were desperate. I had used my access, the same access they had unknowingly granted me by linking my identity to their fraudulent schemes to pull the property records and mortgage statements for the estate in Briar Ridge. I found that the house, their crown jewel, the physical manifestation of their ego, was leveraged to the hilt. They had refinanced 3 times in the last 5 years. They had stripped the equity out of the walls to pay for country club dues, lease payments on luxury cars, and the endless upkeep of an image they could no longer afford. Their retirement accounts were drained. Their investment portfolio was a graveyard of penny stocks and bad bets. They were drowning in debt, just like they had forced me to drown. But they were doing it in designer clothes while sipping vintage wine. The only assets they had left with any real value were the house itself, assuming they could sell it before the bank foreclosed, and a plot of undeveloped lakefront land in the Catskills that had been in my mother's family for generations. The house was not just a building, it was the stage where they performed the play of the perfect Riley family. It was the venue for the charity galas, the garden parties, and soon, the pre-wedding brunch for Delaney and Trent. Losing that house would be a death sentence for their social standing. They would rather die than be seen renting a condo, and that fear was the key to the cage they had built for me. I looked at the stack of papers I had printed. I needed a lever. I needed a mechanism that would make them hand me the keys to their kingdom while thinking they were handing me a shield. I opened a fresh document on my laptop. I began to draft. I did not write a confession. A confession can be retracted. A confession can be argued as coerced. I needed something binding. I needed a contract. I titled the document Asset Preservation and Temporary Trusteeship Agreement. I used the dense, impenetrable language of high finance law. I filled the pages with clauses about fiduciary duty, insolvency protection, and third-party custodial management. The premise of the trap was simple, designed to appeal to their specific brand of paranoia. I would tell them that if I pleaded guilty to the embezzlement charges, the government would immediately move to seize any assets connected to the fraud. Since they had used the stolen money to renovate their kitchen, a fact I now had proof of their house was contaminated property, it was liable to be frozen by the feds. But, I would argue, there was a loophole. If they transferred the title of the home and the land into a blind trust managed by me, the person already taking the fall before the indictment came down, the government would view the assets as already segregated. I would explain that since I was going to prison anyway, the assets would be safe under my name because the government couldn't seize property from me that was technically held in trust for future restitution. It was legal gibberish. It made absolutely no sense to anyone who actually understood asset forfeiture laws. If the government wants your house, they take your house. Moving it to the name of the criminal is the worst possible move. But my parents didn't know the law. They only knew fear, and they believed that I was stupid. They believed I was the dutiful, dull-witted daughter who was trying to save them. They would believe that I was taking on the burden of holding the house to protect them. I added a clause at the bottom, buried in paragraph 42, section C. It stated that the trustee me had irrevocable and unilateral power of attorney over the disposition of the assets to satisfy any and all legal debts incurred by the grantors. In plain English, if they signed this, I owned the house, I owned the land, and I could sell it to pay back the money they stole. I printed the documents. They were heavy, warm from the printer. I put them in a crisp blue presentation folder. It looked official. It looked like salvation. Now I needed a witness. I could not use a regular notary. I couldn't use a family friend. I needed someone licensed, impartial, and utterly uninterested in the drama. I searched for mobile notary 24/7 in the area. I found a listing for a woman named Paige Mercer. Her reviews were stellar. Prompt, professional, discreet, no nonsense. I dialed the number. Mercer Mobile Notary, a voice answered on the second ring. It was crisp, efficient, no warmth, just business. Ms. Mercer, I said, keeping my voice steady. My name is Genesis Riley. I have a time-sensitive signing that needs to happen tonight at 8:30 in Briar Ridge. It involves real estate transfers and power of attorney documents. I need a licensed notary to verify identities and witness signatures. I have an opening at 8:30, Paige said. Her voice didn't change pitch. My rate for evening calls in Briar Ridge is $300, plus a $50 rush fee, cash or card. Cash, I said. And I will add a $200 tip if we can start exactly on time and finish within 15 minutes. It is a family matter. Emotions might be high. I need someone who will just execute the job and leave. There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear her typing. I am not a lawyer. Ms. Riley, Paige said, I do not give legal advice. I do not mediate disputes. I check IDs. I ensure the signers are conscious and not under duress. I stamp the paper. That is it. That is exactly what I want, I said. Address. I gave her the address. 4402 Oakwood Lane. I will be there at 8:30 sharp. Have the IDs ready. She hung up. I stared at the phone. The trap was set. The bait was in the folder. The steel jaws were open. But there was one loose end that made my chest ache. Norman. I saw a notification on my screen. He had sent me 3 more texts. Where are you? I'm worried. Please just call me. I looked at his name, and the guilt washed over me like dirty water. Norman was the only good thing in my life. He was the only person who had ever loved me without conditions. And because I loved him, I had to lie to him. If I told him the truth that I was going to trick my parents into signing over their house, that I was building a case to send my sister to prison, he would stop me. He would tell me it was wrong. He would tell me that we should just walk away, declare bankruptcy, and start over somewhere else. He was too good for this war. He didn't understand that you cannot walk away from a predator. You have to kill it. or it will hunt you forever. And more importantly, if he knew the plan, he became an accomplice. I needed him innocent. I needed his shock to be genuine when the hammer dropped. I typed a message. My fingers felt heavy. I am okay. I am sorry I didn't come home. I have to handle this family mess tonight. It is going to be ugly, and I need to do it alone. Please trust me. I will be home late. I love you. I hit send before I could change my mind. I watched the delivered status appear. Then the 3 dots of him typing. Then the dots disappeared. Then they appeared again. Finally, a single message came back. Fix it. Then come home. I put the phone down, feeling a crack in my heart. He thought I was going there to surrender. He thought I was going to fix it by apologizing or lending them money we didn't have. He didn't know that the woman coming home to him tonight would be a different person than the one who left. I packed the blue folder into my bag. I checked my equipment. I had a digital voice recorder, the size of a USB stick, which I taped to the underside of my bra strap. I checked the battery. Full. I had my phone, set to record video, which I planned to place face down on the coffee table. I had the external hard drive with the evidence dossier. But that stays in the car. That was my nuclear option. The blue folder was the scalpel. I left the co-working space. The afternoon traffic was building up. The world was moving on, oblivious to the fact that a family was about to implode. I drove toward Briar Ridge. I stopped at a gas station and changed my clothes in the bathroom. I took off my blazer and put on a soft, oversized cardigan. I washed my face, scrubbing off the makeup until I looked pale and tired. I messed up my hair slightly. I needed to look like the victim. I needed to look like the Genesis they knew defeated. Scared, pliable. I looked in the dirty mirror of the gas station bathroom. The woman staring back at me had eyes that were too old for her face. "Showtime," I whispered. I got back in the car and drove the final miles. I pulled up to the iron gates of 4402 Oakwood Lane at 7:50. The house was lit up like a cruise ship. I could see the silhouette of the chandelier in the foyer. I parked my sedan next to my father's Mercedes. The contrast was almost comical. The predator and the prey, parked side by side. I took a deep breath, clutching the blue folder to my chest like a shield. I walked up the stone steps. I didn't ring the doorbell. I used my key. The key they had given me so I could come over and walk their dogs or water their plants when they were on vacation. I opened the door and stepped into the foyer. The smell of the house hit me expensive candles, floor wax, and old money. "I'm here," I called out, letting my voice waver just enough to sound terrified. My father appeared from the living room. He was holding a Scotch glass. He looked at me, then at the folder in my arms, and a small, satisfied smile touched his lips. "Good," he said, turning his back on me to walk into the living room. "We were waiting. The lawyer sent the plea agreement. We have a lot of paperwork to get through." I followed him. "Yes," I said softly to his back. "We certainly do." I stepped onto the Persian rug. The trap was set. The players were in position. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the pawn, I was the hand moving the pieces. I walked into the living room at 3 minutes past 8 o'clock. I had rehearsed this entrance in the car mirror a dozen times. I hunched my shoulders forward, creating a concave shape with my chest that suggested defeat. I kept my eyes lowered, fixing my gaze on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug, rather than the faces of the people who were waiting to consume me. I had rubbed my eyes until they were red and irritated, giving the impression of a woman who had spent the last 4 hours weeping rather than auditing. "I am sorry I am late," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. "I had to drive around. I had to think." My mother, Celeste, was pacing by the fireplace. She held a crystal tumbler filled with white wine. Her knuckles were white against the glass. When she saw me, she stopped, letting out a breath that was half sigh, half hiss. "We were worried, Genesis," she said, though her tone suggested annoyance rather than concern. "The lawyers are expecting the signed plea agreement by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We cannot drag this out." My father, Graham, sat in his leather armchair. He did not get up. He looked at me with a mixture of impatience and pity. To him, I was a broken appliance that finally needed to be fixed so it could perform its one function. "Did you speak to Norman?" he asked. I told him I had to handle a family emergency. I lied. "He doesn't know the details. Not yet." "Good," Graham said. He pointed to the coffee table where a stack of legal documents lay waiting. "Sit down. Read it if you want. But it is standard. You admit to the misappropriation of funds. You admit to acting alone. You express remorse. We have arranged for a character witness statement to be submitted to the judge to help with sentencing." I sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching my blue folder to my chest. I looked at Delaney. She was curled up in the corner of the love seat, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and innocent, the very picture of a victim. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She knew the script. "I will sign it," I said softly. The tension in the room broke. Shoulders dropped. Breath was exhaled. Graham took a sip of his scotch. "That is the right choice. Jen," Delaney said, her voice sweet and cloying, "we will take care of you. We promise." "I will sign it," I repeated, raising my voice just a fraction, enough to cut through their relief. "But there is a problem. A big problem that the lawyers didn't tell you about." Graham froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about?" I looked up, meeting his eyes with a look of terrified urgency. "I did some research, Dad, about restitution, about asset forfeiture." "And?" Graham demanded, putting the glass down hard. "The government doesn't just put people in prison anymore," I said, letting the words tumble out fast. "They look for the money. They look for where the stolen funds went. If I admit to stealing $300,000, they are going to ask what I bought with it." "You spent it on gambling," Celeste said quickly. "That is the story. You have a problem." "It doesn't matter what the story is," I said. "They will audit the accounts. They will see the transfers." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "They will see the $32,000 that went to Apex Custom Cabinetry. They will see the transfer for this kitchen." I gestured around the room. Celeste went pale. The rouge on her cheeks suddenly looked like clown paint against the ash gray of her skin. She looked at her pristine quartz countertops, her imported Italian range, the physical symbols of her status. "What are you saying?" Celeste whispered. "I am saying that if the feds trace the money to this house, they will classify the house as proceeds of crime." I said, "They can freeze the title. They can seize the property to pay back the victims. They could lock this house down for years while the investigation is ongoing. You could lose it." It was a lie, or at least a massive exaggeration. The government rarely seized a primary residence for a $30,000 kitchen renovation, especially if the homeowners claimed ignorance, but I knew my audience. To Graham and Celeste Riley, this house was not shelter. It was their skin. Without it, they were naked. Graham stood up. He walked over to the window, looking out at the dark lawn. I could see the fear radiating off him. He wasn't afraid of me going to prison. He was afraid of a foreclosure sign on his lawn. "We can't let that happen," Graham muttered. "The Holbrooks if they see a federal seizure notice on the door." "I have a solution," I said. I placed the blue folder on the table, right on top of their plea deal. "What is this?" Graham asked, turning around. "It is an asset preservation trust," I explained, using the most bureaucratic voice I could muster. "I drafted it up. It is a legal loophole. If you transfer the control of the house and the lake property into a trust managed by me temporarily before I sign the plea deal, it confuses the ownership chain." Graham frowned, walking back to the table. He picked up the folder. "How does giving it to you help?" "Because I am the one going to prison," I said, widening my eyes to look earnest. "If the house is technically under my control, but held in trust for restitution purposes, the government sees it as already secured. They won't freeze it because I'm already offering it up as collateral. But here is the trick." I leaned in. lowering my voice like a conspirator. Since it is a private trust, I can just sit on it. I don't sell it. I just hold the title so they can't touch you. When I get out in 2 years, I transfer it back. It insulates you from the investigation. Graham flipped through the pages. He was reading the headings. Transfer of deed. Irrevocable power of attorney. Grant of control. He stopped at page 4. His finger traced a line. This gives you full legal authority over the property, Graham said slowly. He looked at me, suspicion narrowing his eyes. You could sell it. My heart stopped for a beat. This was the precipice. This was the moment where he either realized he was handing a loaded gun to his enemy, or he decided I was too weak to pull the trigger. I know, I said, looking down at my hands. I know it looks like a lot of power. But Dad, I am going to prison for you. I am ruining my life for Delaney. Do you really think I would sell your house? I looked up at him, letting a single tear leak out of my eye. I had been saving it. I just want to make sure there's a home to come back to, I whispered. I'm just trying to protect the family. If you don't sign it, and the Fed sees it, that is it. It's over. Graham looked at the document. Then he looked at Celeste. Celeste was trembling. Graham, we cannot risk the house. If Miranda Halbrook hears about a seizure. Graham looked back at me. He was calculating. He saw a woman wearing a cheap cardigan, a woman with bad credit, a woman who had spent 33 years saying yes to his every demand. He didn't see a threat. He saw a tool. She is right, Graham said, his voice regaining its arrogance. She is obedient. She knows that if she screws this up, the monthly payments we promised her disappear. He tossed the folder back onto the table. Fine, he said. We sign, but we need a notary. Tonight. I called one, I said. She is on her way. She will be here in... I checked my watch. 10 minutes. You called a notary? Delaney asked, speaking up from the corner. Her voice was sharp. She was smarter than our parents in some ways. She had the instincts of a survivor. Why did you have that ready? Because I didn't want to waste time, I said, turning to her. I want to get this over with. I want to go home to my husband and tell him I'm going away for 2 years. Do you have a problem with that, Delaney? She shrank back slightly at the mention of prison. The guilt didn't touch her, but the reality of the mess made her uncomfortable. No, of course not. The doorbell rang at exactly 8:30. I stood up. That must be her. I walked to the door and opened it. Paige Mercer stood on the porch. She was wearing a gray blazer and carrying a sleek black briefcase. She looked like she was made of titanium cold, hard, and unbreakable. Genesis Riley, she asked. Yes, I said. Please come in. Paige stepped into the foyer. She didn't smile. She didn't look at the expensive art. She walked straight to the living room, placed her briefcase on the coffee table, and snapped the latches open. I am Paige Mercer, licensed mobile notary, she announced to the room. Her voice was flat and professional. I am here to witness the signing of property transfer documents. I need to see government-issued identification for Graham Riley, Celeste Riley, and Genesis Riley. Graham looked annoyed by her tone. He was used to people fawning over him. I am Graham Riley. This is my house. ID, please, Paige said, not even looking up as she pulled her logbook out. Graham grumbled but pulled out his wallet. Celeste fumbled in her purse. I handed over my driver's license. Paige checked each ID against the faces. She scrutinized the expiration dates. She was thorough. I had paid her to be thorough. I needed this to be unassailable in court. The documents, Paige asked. I handed her the blue folder. She flipped through them. She wasn't reading the content. She was checking for signature lines and dates. Okay, she said. Mr. and Mrs. Riley, you are signing as grantors, transferring full control and title of the property located at 4402 Oakwood Lane and the parcel in Catskill County to the Genesis Riley Asset Preservation Trust. Do you understand that you are signing over legal ownership? It was the mandatory question, the safety check. Graham waved his hand dismissively. Yes, it is a trust arrangement. We know what it is. Let's get on with it. Paige uncapped her pen. Please sign here, and initial here. Graham bent over the table. The scratch of the pen on the paper was loud in the silent room. Scritch, scratch. He signed his name. He signed away his sovereignty. He signed away the only leverage he had left in the world. He handed the pen to Celeste. Celeste hesitated. Her hand hovered over the paper. This feels fast, she murmured. Suddenly, Delaney's phone began to vibrate violently on the side table. It buzzed against the wood like an angry hornet. Delaney picked it up. She looked at the screen, and the color drained from her face. It's Trent, she hissed, and his mother is on the line. Don't answer it, Graham barked. They left a voicemail, Delaney said, putting the phone to her ear. Her eyes widened. Oh my God, Mrs. Halbrook. She says she heard a rumor from her banker about irregularities with the charity accounts. She wants to know if there is anything we need to tell them before the engagement party invitations go out tomorrow. Panic detonated in the room. They know, Celeste gasped. She looked at Graham. Graham? They know? They don't know, Graham snapped, though sweat had instantly beaded on his forehead. They are fishing. We have to lock this down. If the Halbrooks bail, the creditors will swarm us by morning. He looked at Celeste. Sign the damn paper. Celeste, we need the assets protected now. If Genesis takes the fall tomorrow, we can tell Miranda it was a rogue employee and the family assets are secure. Celeste didn't hesitate anymore. The fear of social exile was greater than the fear of losing her home. She grabbed the pen. She signed furiously, her signature jagged and rushed. Here, she said, shoving the papers at Paige. It is done. Paige didn't blink. She took the papers. She applied her stamp. Thud. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a block. Thud. I need Genesis Riley to sign as trustee, Paige said. I stepped forward. I took the pen. My hand was steady. I signed my name. I felt a surge of electricity travel up my arm with that ink. The house was mine. The lake house was mine. Their future was mine. Paige gathered the documents. She separated the copies. She handed one set to Graham, kept one for her records, and handed the original set to me. That concludes the notarization, Paige said. She closed her logbook. That will be $350. I pulled an envelope of cash from my pocket and handed it to her. Thank you, Paige said. She packed her bag. She turned and walked out. The front door clicked shut. The silence that followed was heavy, but the quality of the air had changed. The panic was receding, replaced by the familiar toxicity that I had lived with my entire life. Graham poured himself another scotch. He took a long drink, then turned to look at me. The fear was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by contempt. Well, he said, wiping his mouth, that is handled. At least you finally did something useful for this family. Genesis. Celeste was already checking her reflection in the mirror, fixing her hair. We need to draft a statement for Miranda Halbrook. We will tell her that we discovered Genesis's misconduct and we are handling it internally. Delaney looked at me. She smiled, a small, cruel thing. Thanks, Jen. I knew you wouldn't let me down. You're used to being the disappointment anyway. It fits you. I stood there, holding the folder that contained the deed to their house. I looked at them, my father drinking his scotch, my mother fixing her face, my sister smirking. They thought the play was over. They thought the curtain had fallen and they had taken their bows. They didn't realize that I had just locked the theater doors and set fire to the stage. You should get going, Graham said dismissively, waving a hand at me without looking. Go home. Get your affairs in order. The lawyers will email you the location for the surrender tomorrow. I looked at the back of his head. Goodbye, Dad, I said. I turned and walked out of the house. The night air was cool and crisp. I walked to my car, my heels clicking on the stone path. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it looked like, and I knew exactly what it was going to look like when I was done with it. I got into my car and placed the blue folder on the passenger seat. I rested my hand on it for a moment, feeling the texture of the paper. It was done. They had signed. I started the engine. The radio came on, playing a soft jazz tune. I pulled my phone out. I had one more call to make, but not to Norman, not yet. I looked at the house one last time in the rearview mirror as I drove through the gates. They were celebrating inside. They were probably toasting to their own brilliance, to their survival. Let them drink, because tomorrow, the hangover was going to be lethal. I had made it as far as the end of the driveway, the iron gates looming in my headlights. When the realization hit me, it was not a thought. It was a physical sensation, a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with unfinished business. I looked at the blue folder resting on the passenger seat. Inside were the documents that gave me legal ownership of their lives. I had the weapon. I had the ammunition. But if I drove away now, if I let them sleep soundly in their beds thinking they had won, I was still playing by their rules. I was still the obedient daughter fading into the night to let them enjoy their champagne. If I let them wake up tomorrow feeling safe, they would have 8 hours to plot their next move against Norman. They would have 8 hours to solidify their narrative with the lawyers. I slammed on the brakes. The tires crunched on the gravel. I put the car in reverse. I didn't drive back up to the house. I left the car running by the gate. I walked back up the driveway, the cold wind cutting through my cardigan, fueling the fire that was finally burning out the last of my hesitation. I opened the front door. I hadn't locked it behind me. They were exactly where I left them. The tableau of the perfect family was in full swing. Graham was refilling his scotch. Celeste was laughing a sharp, brittle sound while holding up her phone, presumably looking at photos of the engagement venue. Delaney was reclining on the sofa. Her shoes kicked off, looking like a queen who had just survived a minor peasant uprising. They stopped when I walked in. The laughter died. "Forgot something?" Graham asked. He didn't look concerned. He looked amused. He took a slow sip of his drink, swirling the amber liquid. "I suppose you want gas money? Or maybe a hug. We are all out of hugs. Genesis, you used up your quota?" "I forgot to tell you something," I said. My voice was strange to my own ears, low, steady, completely void of the tremor that had been my trademark for 3 decades. "Well, say it and get out," Celeste said, waving her hand as if shooing a fly. "We have to call Miranda back. We have to save the wedding you almost ruined." "You know," Graham mused, leaning back against the mantel. "I was thinking, for 30 years, I wondered what we were going to do with you. You were never bright. You were never charming. But tonight, you proved me wrong." He pointed his glass at me. "You are finally useful. You are the trash can we needed to carry out the garbage. It is a noble profession. Genesis, someone has to be the disposal unit," Celeste chimed in, her voice dripping with that poisonous sweetness she reserved for her most cutting remarks. "Don't be mean, Graham. Genesis has her place. Think of a garden. Delaney is the orchid. She is rare. She is beautiful. She needs light and care. And Genesis." She looked at me with a pitying smile. "Genesis is the dirt, the soil. It is dark. It is dirty. And people walk on it. But the orchid needs the dirt to grow. You should be proud. Darling, you are feeding the flower." The dirt. I walked over to the coffee table. I didn't look at them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I placed it face up on the polished mahogany surface, right next to Delaney's empty wine glass. The screen was bright. The recording app was open. The timer was ticking. 58 minutes and counting. Graham frowned. "What is that?" "I am not going to prison," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a record screeching to a halt. "Excuse me," Graham said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am not going to prison," I repeated. "And neither is Delaney, because if Delaney goes to prison, she drags you down. And if I go to prison, I drag you down. So, We are at an impasse. You signed the deal, Graham snapped, stepping forward. You agreed. It is done. I signed a piece of paper promising to take control of your assets, I corrected him. And you signed a piece of paper giving me that control. I tapped the blue folder I was still clutching. You didn't read paragraph 42. Section C, did you? Dad? I asked. You were so busy worrying about the Halbrooks, so busy rushing to hide your money, that you didn't check the definitions. Graham's face went slack. What definitions? Irrevocable and unilateral power of attorney regarding the disposition of assets, I recited from memory. That means I don't just hold the house. Graham, I own the decision to sell it. I own the decision to liquidate it. And the trust structure. It's not a shelter. It's a funnel. I am the sole trustee. You are the beneficiaries. Yes, but only at my discretion. I looked at Celeste. You just signed over the deed to this house to the dirt. Graham's glass hit the floor. It didn't break. It bounced with a heavy thud, spilling scotch across the Persian rug. He lunged at me. It was a primal reaction. He moved fast for an old man, his hand reaching for the phone on the table, or maybe for my throat. Don't, I shouted. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. He stopped inches from me, his chest heaving, his face a mask of purple rage. If you touch me, I said, my voice cold as liquid nitrogen. I file a police report for assault, and then I show them the recording of this entire evening. I show them how you coerced me. I show them the fraud, and then I show them the document you just signed voluntarily in front of a licensed notary. Graham froze. His hands were shaking, hovering in the air like claws. You can't, he whispered. That document. It was a trick. It's fraud. Is it? I tilted my head. You signed it. Paige Mercer verified your ID. She asked you if you understood. You said yes. If you sue me to void the contract, you have to stand up in open court and admit that the only reason you signed it was because you were trying to hide assets from a federal investigation. You have to admit you were committing a felony to cover up another felony. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Go ahead, Dad. Sue me. I will represent myself. I have a lot of free time. Graham lowered his hands. He looked at the phone recording on the table. He looked at the blue folder in my arms. He realized, finally, that the trap hadn't snapped on me. It had snapped on him. What do you want? Celeste asked. Her voice was trembling. She was looking at the walls of her living room as if they were already dissolving. I want a full confession, I said. I want a signed affidavit, notarized, stating that I had no knowledge of the Laney Life financials. I want a statement acknowledging that the loans in my name were taken out without my consent. I want you to clear my credit report, and I want you to assume full liability for the debt. If we do that, Delaney cried out from the sofa, I go to jail, they will arrest me. Then you better hire a good lawyer, I said, not looking at her. Because I am done paying for your tickets to Paris. Delaney burst into tears. It wasn't the pretty, single-tear crying she used for Instagram. This was ugly, heaving, red-faced sobbing. It was the sound of a spoiled child realizing that the world does not actually revolve around her. For the first time in her life, she was terrified. You can't do this to your sister, Celeste pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. I pulled away. You told me the dirt was necessary. Mom, well, the dirt is moving, and when the earth moves, houses fall down. I picked up my phone from the table and stopped the recording. I hit save. You have 24 hours, I said. By 8 o'clock tomorrow night, I want those affidavits sent to my email. If I don't get them, I list this house on the market on Friday morning. I will sell it for 50 cents on the dollar just to watch it burn fast. I turned to leave. Genesis. The voice stopped me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't screaming. It was Graham. He had composed himself. The rage was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. He was standing by the fireplace, smoothing his tie, He looked like the businessman who had crushed competitors for 40 years. He wasn't begging. He wasn't crying. He was calculating. "You played a good hand," Graham said softly. "I underestimated you. I admit that." He looked at me with eyes that were flat and dead. "But you are forgetting something. You are playing checkers. Genesis. I am playing chess. I have the house, Dad," I said. "Checkmate. You have the house," he agreed. "But we have Norman." My blood ran cold. "Norman didn't sign anything tonight," Graham said, his voice smooth as oil. "But Norman signed that guarantee on the loan 3 years ago. You saw it. We have his social security number. We have his signature, or at least a digital signature that traces back to a computer in your apartment." He took a step toward me. "If you burn us," Graham said, "we don't just go down. We take him with us." I walked down the steps, my legs feeling numb. I got into my car. I had the deed. I had the leverage. But as I drove away from the house, watching the lights of Briar Ridge fade in my rearview mirror, I knew that the victory was hollow. I had started a war, but I hadn't realized until this moment that the battlefield was going to be my marriage. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Okay, Dad," I said to the darkness of the car. "You want to play chess? Let's play." I wasn't just fighting for my freedom anymore. I was fighting for Norman, and for that, I would have to be something much worse than dirt. I would have to be a landslide. The morning sun that filtered into our apartment in East Harbor did not bring warmth. It brought a harsh, exposing light that highlighted the dust motes dancing in the air and the exhaustion etched into the lines of my husband's face. I had not slept. I had spent the hours between midnight and dawn sitting at our small kitchen table, staring at the blue folder that contained the deed to my parents' house, waiting for the inevitable retaliation. I knew Graham Riley. I knew he would not accept defeat. He would not just roll over and let his disappointment of a daughter dismantle his empire. He would strike back, and he would aim for the softest target he could find. That target was sitting across from me, nursing a mug of black coffee. Oblivious to the fact that he was about to become the center of a legal war, Norman Pierce looked tired. He had waited up for me, and when I finally came home, I had given him a sanitized version of the truth. I told him there was a dispute. I told him my parents were in financial trouble. I did not tell him that I effectively owned them. I did not tell him that his father-in-law had threatened to frame him. I was trying to protect him, but silence is a dam that eventually breaks. The breach began at 7:15 in the morning. Norman's phone buzzed against the Formica table. It was a violent, vibrating sound that made us both jump. He looked at the screen and frowned. "It's your dad," Norman said, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. "He has called 3 times in the last 10 minutes. "Don't answer it," I said quickly, too quickly. Norman looked at me, his brow furrowing. "Genesis, what is going on? Why is Graham calling me at the crack of dawn?" The phone buzzed again. This time, a text message, notification lit up the screen. The preview was visible. "Your wife is doing something crazy. You need to stop her before she destroys the family. Call me." Norman read the message. He looked up at me, and the trust that usually lived in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of suspicion. "What does he mean?" "Jen," Norman asked, "what did you do last night?" "I secured our future," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I stopped them from using us." "Using us?" Norman picked up the phone, scrolling through missed notifications. "I have 5 voicemails, 2 from your mom, 3 from Graham, and—" He stopped. His face went pale. "And an email from a law firm, the Bradford Group." My stomach dropped. The Bradford Group was my father's Shark Tank. They were the lawyers he used to bully contractors and silence competitors. They moved fast. "Read it," I said, bracing myself. Norman opened the email. His hand began to shake. "Dear Mr. Pierce," he read aloud, his voice trembling. "We represent Graham and Celeste Riley. We are writing to inform you that your wife, Genesis Riley, has engaged in acts of elder abuse, fraud, and coercion to obtain signatures on property transfer documents. While our clients were under extreme duress, we have reason to believe she is suffering from an acute mental health crisis. We are preparing to file an emergency injunction." Norman stopped reading. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. "Elder abuse," he whispered. "Coercion genesis. Did you force them to sign something?" "I didn't force them," I said, standing up. "I outsmarted them. They were going to send me to prison." "Norman, they were going to make me take the fall for Delaney's theft. I just turned the tables." "By doing what?" Norman stood up too, his voice rising. "By stealing their house. That is what this says. It says you tricked them into signing over the deed." "It wasn't a trick," I shouted, the frustration boiling over. "It was leverage. They have been stealing from us for years. Norman, they have been using my name and your name to take out loans we didn't know about." "My name." Norman looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, his phone rang again. It wasn't Graham this time. The caller ID flashed a picture of a smiling blonde woman, Delaney. "Don't answer that," I warned. "She is part of it." Norman ignored me. He swiped the green button and put it on speaker. "Norman." Delaney's voice filled the small kitchen. She sounded hysterical, breathless, terrified. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. "Oh God, Norman, is she there? Is Genesis there?" "She is here," Norman said, watching me. "Delaney, what is happening?" "She is having a breakdown." "Norman," Delaney sobbed. "She came over last night and she was screaming. She had these papers she said if Mom and Dad didn't sign over the house, she would burn it down. She said she hated us. She said she wanted to ruin my wedding. She made them sign. Norman, Mom is terrified. We think she might be dangerous." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were painting me as the unstable, jealous sister, and they were using my own husband as the jury. "That is a lie," I said loudly, stepping toward the phone. "Delaney, tell him about the credit cards. Tell him about the embezzlement." "See," Delaney cried. "She is making things up. She is paranoid, Norman. Please. You have to help us. You are the only sane one left. We just want the house back. We won't press charges if she just tears up the papers. Please, Norman, for the family." Norman hung up the phone. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the breath out of me. He looked at me, and I saw a man torn in half. He loved me, but he had spent 10 years being charmed by the Rileys. He saw them as successful, generous people who occasionally looked down on us, not as predators, and he saw me secretive, angry, and now, according to them, unstable. "Tell me the truth," Norman said. His voice was low and hard. "Did you make them sign over the house?" "Yes," I admitted. "But—" "And did you tell me you were doing it?" "No." "Why?" "Because you wouldn't have let me," I cried. "You are too good. Norman, you would have tried to talk it out. You would have tried to be reasonable, and they would have eaten you alive. So you lied to me," he said. "For my own good. I did it to protect you." I grabbed my laptop from the bag. "Norman, look at this. Please, just look at the data." I opened the evidence folder. I pulled up the loan document, the one with his name on it. "Look," I pointed to the screen. "This is a business loan for Laney Life, $150,000. It is in default. And look at the guarantor." Norman squinted at the screen. He saw his name. He saw his social security number. I waited for the anger. I waited for him to shout that they had forged his signature. I waited for him to join me in the trenches. But he didn't shout. He went very, very still. "I know about that," he said softly. The world stopped. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed to vanish. "What?" I whispered. Norman rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the floor. He looked ashamed. He looked like a child caught with his hand in the jar. 3 years ago," Norman said. his voice barely audible. Your dad called me. He took me out for a beer. He told me Delaney was in a tight spot with the business launch. He said she needed a bridge loan, but her credit was too thin. He said he couldn't co-sign because of his own liquidity issues. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Norman, what did you do? He said it was just a formality, Norman continued, still not looking at me. He said it was a character reference guarantee. He said it wouldn't actually affect my credit unless the business went under. And he promised me. Genesis that he would cover it if anything happened. He said I was helping the family. He said I was finally stepping up to be a Riley man. I stared at him. The betrayal was so sharp, so unexpected, that I couldn't breathe. You signed it, I asked. You signed a loan guarantee for Delaney without telling me. He told me not to, Norman pleaded, looking up. He said you would worry. He said you were too stressed about money and that this would be a nice surprise when Delaney's business took off, and we could tell you that I helped save it. I wanted to be the hero. Gemma, I wanted them to respect me. I backed away from him until my back hit the refrigerator. It wasn't forgery. It wasn't identity theft. It was manipulation. Graham had played Norman like a fiddle. He had used Norman's insecurity, his desire to be accepted, to trap him. Oh my God, I whispered. Norman, do you realize what you did? You didn't sign a character reference. You signed a full liability guarantee. If that loan isn't paid, they can sue us. They can take everything. But Graham lied. I screamed. Graham has been lying to you for 10 years. And now, I stopped. The pieces clicked together in my mind, forming a terrifying picture. That is why he is so confident, I said, my voice trembling. That is his ace. If I go to court, if I try to expose them, he will call you to the stand. He will ask you if you signed that document, and you will have to say yes. Norman stammered. I didn't know what it really was. It doesn't matter, I said. On paper, you are a co-conspirator. You helped fund the fraud. If I take them down, Norman, they will drag you down with them. They will say we were all in on it together. Norman sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. I just wanted to help. My phone rang again. It wasn't Graham. It wasn't Delaney. It was an unknown number. I picked it up, my hand shaking. Hello? Genesis Riley. The voice was metallic, professional. Yes. This is Paige Mercer, the notary. I stood up straighter. Paige, what is it? I am calling to give you a heads up. Paige said. Her voice was low, like she was walking somewhere quickly. I just received a call from a man identifying himself as a senior partner at the Bradford Group. He offered me $10,000 to sign an affidavit stating that you were physically aggressive last night and that your parents appeared to be under the influence of narcotics when they signed the deed. I closed my eyes. They were moving fast. They were trying to discredit the signing. What did you say? I asked, terrified of the answer. Everyone has a price, and $10,000 was a lot of money for a mobile notary. I told him that my integrity is not for sale, Paige said. I told him that I documented the session, that everyone was sober, and that the signatures were voluntary. I told him to lose my number. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thank you, Paige. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Paige warned. I am telling you this because they are desperate. People with that kind of money don't offer bribes unless they are scared. They are going to play dirty. Ms. Riley, they are going to come for your character. If you have evidence, you better lock it down, and you better get a lawyer. The line went dead. I looked at Norman. He was still sitting at the table, his head in his hands, a broken man who had tried to buy respect with a signature he didn't understand. I looked at the blue folder. I looked at the laptop. I had the evidence. I had the truth. But truth is a fragile thing in a courtroom if you don't have the narrative. My family was coming for me. They had the lawyers. They had the money. And they had my husband's mistake as a weapon. I walked over to the table. I placed my hand on Norman's shoulder. He flinched. "Norman," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red. "I am so sorry. Jen, I ruined it. I ruined everything." "No," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You didn't ruin it. You just changed the stakes." I pulled a chair out and sat across from him. I opened the laptop and turned it so he could see the full timeline, the credit cards, the fake email, the kitchen renovation, the money laundering through the charity. "Listen to me," I said, forcing him to meet my gaze. "They are betting on one thing. They are betting that you will choose the comfortable lie over the ugly truth. They are betting that you are weak." I took his hand. It was cold and rough. "I need you to decide right now. Norman, not tomorrow, right now. Are you the man who wants to be Graham Riley's pet? Or are you the man who is going to help me burn his house down?" Norman looked at the screen. He saw the years of theft. He saw the calculated cruelty. He saw the way they had laughed at us while spending our future. "They tried to bribe the notary," I told him. "They are trying to frame me as crazy, and they are going to use your signature to put me in prison if we don't stop them." Norman's jaw tightened. The shame in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a slow, burning anger. It was the anger of a good man who realizes he has been played for a fool. "What do we do?" Norman asked. "We don't sue them," I said, "and we don't negotiate." I pulled a fresh USB drive from my bag. "We are going to prepare a litigation package," I said. "But we aren't sending it to their lawyers." "Where are we sending it?" "To the one person Graham Riley fears more than the FBI, I said. "We are going to send it to the person who holds the checkbook for the wedding." I typed a name into the search bar, Miranda Halbrook. "But first," I said, "I need you to write something down. I need you to write a sworn statement about that night at the bar with Graham. Every word he said, every promise he made." Norman nodded. He reached for a pen. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Graham. "Pick up the phone. Norman, don't let her drag you down." Norman looked at the message. Then he looked at me. He picked up the phone. He didn't answer it. He turned it off. "Tell me what to write," Norman said. I looked at my husband. He wasn't a pawn anymore. He was a witness. And the Rileys were about to learn that the only thing more dangerous than a woman with nothing to lose is a husband with a score to settle. The Halbrook estate in Greenwich was not a home. It was a fortress disguised as a manor. The driveway was a quarter-mile of crushed white stone that crunched loudly under the tires of my aging sedan, a sound that felt like an intrusion in the heavy, expensive silence of the neighborhood. The invitation to the intimate gathering had not been extended to me or my husband. It was a crisis management meeting masquerading as drinks. The rumors about Laney Life's financial instability had started to leak, likely a result of unpaid vendors talking to the wrong people and Miranda Halbrook. The matriarch of the Halbrook dynasty had summoned the families to clear the air before the wedding invitations were formally mailed. My parents, Graham and Celeste, were already inside. I could imagine them. Graham would be holding a tumbler of single malt scotch, charming the room with his self-deprecating wit, while Celeste would be playing the role of the doting mother, likely making subtle comments about how stressful entrepreneurship was for her brilliant daughter. They were actors on a stage they had built out of debt and lies. I parked my car between a Bentley and a Porsche. Norman sat in the passenger seat. He was wearing his only suit, a charcoal gray one we had bought for a funeral 3 years ago. It was tight in the shoulders, but he didn't look uncomfortable. He looked like a stone wall that had decided to walk. "Are you ready?" I asked him. Norman looked at the front door, then at me. "I am done being polite. Jenna, let's go." We walked up the steps, the security guard at the door, a man in a black blazer who likely knew the names of every guest on the approved list, stepped forward to intercept us. "Name?" he asked, his eyes scanning my off-brand heels and Norman's tight suit with professional disdain. "Genesis Riley," I said, not slowing down. "And this is my husband. We are family." I don't have you on the list, Mrs. Riley, he said, moving to block the path. That is because the list is incomplete, I said. I held up a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax tape. I have financial disclosures for Mrs. Hallbrook regarding the merger of our families. If you stop me, I will leave this with the press van I saw parked down the street. Do you want to explain to your boss why the New York Post got the documents before she did? There was no press van, but the guard didn't know that. In high society, the threat of a scandal is more effective than a gun. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Go ahead, he muttered. Stepping aside, we walked through the heavy oak doors and into the lion's den. The gathering was in the library, a room with ceilings high enough to have its own weather system. The walls were lined with books that had never been read, and the air smelled of beeswax and old money. There were about 20 people in the room, the inner circle of the Hallbrook clan, their lawyers, and my family. The conversation was a low hum of polite laughter and clinking glass. When I stepped through the archway, the sound died instantly. It was as if someone had cut the power. Graham was standing by the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, mid-sentence. His mouth stayed open for a second before snapping shut. Celeste froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips. Delaney, who was sitting on a leather ottoman next to Trent Hallbrook, went pale. Genesis! Celeste's voice was a breathless squeak. What on earth are you doing here? I didn't look at her. I didn't look at Graham. I walked straight toward the center of the room, where Miranda Hallbrook sat in a high-backed velvet chair. Miranda was 60 years old and looked 40. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and trousers that cost more than my car. She didn't look angry. She looked curious. She was a woman who ran a shipping empire. She knew that people who crash parties usually bring interesting news. Mrs. Hallbrook, I said. My voice was calm, projected from the diaphragm, the way I spoke in boardrooms when I was outlining a corporate collapse. Genesis, Miranda said, setting her tea down. This is unexpected. Your parents said you were unwell. My parents say a lot of things, I said. I placed the manila envelope on the low table in front of her. It hit the wood with a heavy, solid thud. It wasn't just paper. It was an autopsy of a crime. What is this? Miranda asked, eyeing the envelope but not touching it. That is a forensic accounting of the last 5 years of Laney life, I said. It includes wire transfers, credit card statements, and loan applications. It traces the flow of funds from the Briar Ridge Community Improvement Fund into my sister's personal accounts. The room went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the wine fridge in the corner. You are lying, Delaney screamed. She jumped up, her face twisting from panic into rage. She is lying. She is jealous because I'm getting married and she lives in a dump. Genesis, get out, Graham barked, striding toward me. His face was flushing a dangerous shade of red. I apologize. Miranda, my daughter has been having episodes. She creates these fantasies. We are handling it. He reached out to grab my arm, to physically drag me out of the room before the damage became permanent, but he never touched me. Norman stepped in front of me. My husband is not a violent man. He is a mechanic. He fixes things, but in that moment, he looked like he was ready to break something. He caught Graham's wrist in midair. Don't touch her, Norman said. His voice was low, a rumble in his chest that carried more threat than a shout. You don't get to touch her anymore. Graham looked at Norman in shock. For 10 years, Norman had been the polite, grateful son-in-law who fixed Graham's car for free and laughed at his jokes. Let go of me, Graham hissed. You ungrateful little... I said back off, Norman said, and he shoved Graham back, not hard, but with enough force to make my father stumble. The room gasped. Physical confrontation was not something that happened in the Hallbrook library. Delaney rushed forward, grabbing my other arm, her nails digging into my sweater. Get out. You are ruining everything. You are just a bitter, ugly loser. I didn't pull away. I didn't slap her. I looked at Miranda Hallbrook. Mrs. Hallbrook, I said, ignoring my sister clawing at me. You are preparing to marry your son into a federal case. If that envelope isn't enough, check the public records for the lien on my parents' house. As of last night, they don't own it anymore. I do. Miranda raised a hand. Let her go. Delaney. Delaney froze. But Miranda, she is… I said let her go, Miranda commanded. Delaney dropped her hand. Miranda reached forward and picked up the envelope. She broke the seal. She slid the summary sheet out. She put on a pair of reading glasses that hung around her neck on a gold chain. She read in silence for a long minute. Then she looked up at Delaney. It wasn't a look of horror. It was a look of confirmation. I knew it, Miranda said softly. She looked at her son. Trent. I told you the numbers didn't add up. Trent, a boutique brand doesn't generate this kind of cash flow in the second year. You checked, Delaney stammered. We ran a background check 3 months ago, Miranda said coolly. We found the debts in Genesis's name, but we couldn't link them to you. We assumed your sister was just irresponsible, as your parents claimed. But this, she tapped the spreadsheet. This connects the accounts. This shows the transfers. It is forged, Graham shouted. He was desperate now, sweat shining on his forehead. Genesis cooked these up. She is an accountant. She knows how to fake documents. She is trying to extort us. She demanded money last night, and when we refused, she threatened to fabricate this. Fabricate, I asked. Did I fabricate your voice, Dad? I pulled my phone from my pocket. I had cued the audio file. This is from last night, I announced to the room, in my parents' living room. 8:13 p.m. I pressed play. The audio was crisp. The acoustics of their living room were perfect. Graham's voice. You're used to suffering. No one looks at you. 2 years in minimum security won't kill you. The sentence hung in the air, brutal and undeniable. Trent Halbrook stood up. He looked at Delaney. You wanted your sister to go to prison. It wasn't like that, Delaney cried. We were just trying to fix a mistake. A mistake, I asked. You call 5 years of identity theft a mistake. It is a recording out of context, Celeste shrieked. She was clutching her pearls, looking like a ship captain watching the water rise. She is twisting it. She forced us to say those things. She came in with a gun. A gun. I raised an eyebrow. That is a new one. Mom. She coerced us. Graham seized on the narrative. She threatened our lives. That is why we signed the papers. That is why we said those things. We were terrified. This is an invalid contract signed under duress. The door to the library opened again. Actually, a calm, professional voice said, that is not true. Every head turned. Paige Mercer stood in the doorway. I had texted her the moment we parked. I had paid her double her rush fee to be here. Waiting in the hallway, Paige walked into the room. She didn't look at the expensive art. She looked straight at Graham. Who is this? Miranda asked. My name is Paige Mercer, she said. I am the licensed notary who witnessed the signing of the property transfer documents at the Riley residence last night at 8:30 p.m. She pulled a small black logbook from her bag. I observed Mr. and Mrs. Riley for 20 minutes, Paige stated, her voice devoid of emotion. They were not held at gunpoint. They were drinking alcohol. They were coherent. They verified their identities. They signed the documents voluntarily. At no point did anyone ask for help or indicate distress. In fact, Mr. Riley remarked that his daughter was finally being useful. Graham looked like he had been punched in the gut. His duress defense had just evaporated in front of 20 witnesses. She was paid off, Graham stammered. Genesis paid her. Ms. Riley paid my standard fee, Paige said. However, at 9 o'clock this morning, a representative from the Bradford Group offered me $10,000 to lie about the events of last night. I declined. I have the call log if anyone is interested. Miranda Halbrook stood up. She looked at Graham with pure ice in her eyes. You tried to bribe a notary, Miranda asked, to cover up the fact that you framed your own daughter. We didn't frame her, Delaney shouted. She was unraveling now. The pressure too much for her carefully curated reality. We just used her credit. It wasn't stealing the money from the charity. It was just a loan. The endowment fund was just sitting there doing nothing. We were going to pay it back once the wedding gifts came in. The room went deadly silent. Delaney clapped a hand over her mouth. Her eyes went wide. She had just admitted to borrowing from the charity endowment. She had just admitted that the plan was to use the Holbrook wedding money to pay back the embezzled funds. She had just implicated the Holbrook family in a money laundering scheme. "You were going to use my family's money," Trent said, his voice shaking with anger. "To pay back money you stole from a non-profit." No, Trent, baby, listen." Delaney reached for him. Trent stepped back as if she were radioactive. Graham looked around the room. He saw the disgust on the faces of the Holbrooks. He saw the lawyers whispering to each other. He saw his wife weeping silently into her wine. He saw his empire, his reputation, his life, turning to ash, and then he looked at me. I was standing next to Norman, my hand on his arm. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't gloating. I was just watching. Something in Graham's eyes broke. The rational businessman vanished. The narcissist who had lost control took over. "You think you won," Graham whispered. The volume of the room dropped to hear him. "It's over, Graham," I said. "Just stop." "It isn't over," Graham said. A strange, twisted smile spread across his face. He reached into his jacket pocket. For a second, I thought he had a weapon. Norman tensed, ready to tackle him, but Graham didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out his phone. "You want to talk about evidence," Graham said, his voice rising to a manic pitch. "You want to talk about fraud." He tapped the screen furiously. "I just sent an email," Graham announced, looking at Miranda. "To the district attorney's tip line and to the IRS fraud division." "Dad, what are you doing?" Delaney screamed. "I am reporting a crime," Graham said, staring straight at me. "I am reporting a massive identity theft ring run by Genesis Riley and her husband, Norman Pierce. I am admitting that I was aware of it. Yes, but that I was blackmailed into silence. I am turning myself in." "You are insane," I whispered. "You go to prison too." "I know," Graham said. His eyes were wild. "I will go to prison for negligence. Maybe a year, maybe 2. I can handle that. But you—" He pointed a shaking finger at Norman. "You signed the papers. Norman, you are the guarantor. If I go down, the investigation opens everything. They will see your signature. They will see your IP address. They will see that your wife is a forensic expert who knows how to hide money." He laughed, a sound that was jagged and terrifying. "I am blowing it all up. Genesis, if I lose the house, if I lose the reputation, then I am taking you with me. I will drag this through the courts for 5 years. I will spend every last dime I have left to make sure that when the dust settles, you and your mechanic are sharing a cell next to me." He looked at Miranda. "The wedding is off, obviously," Graham said, adjusting his tie. "I suggest you call your lawyers. Miranda, you are going to be subpoenaed as a witness." He looked back at me. "You wanted a war. Genesis, you wanted to audit the family." He spread his arms wide, standing in the wreckage of his life. "Congratulations. You just triggered a federal investigation. Let's see who survives the audit." I stood there, feeling the floor sway beneath me. He had done the one thing I didn't think he would do. He had pulled the pin on the grenade while holding it in his hand. He was willing to destroy himself just to ensure that I didn't walk away clean. He had turned a civil dispute into a federal scorched earth campaign. Norman gripped my hand. His palm was sweating. "What do we do?" Norman whispered. I looked at Graham, who was smiling the smile of a man who has nothing left to lose. I realized then that my preparation wasn't enough. The documents, the recording, the notary. It was all defense. Graham had just launched a nuclear strike, and I had only one move left. It was the move I had kept in the deepest, darkest folder of my hard drive. The move that I had promised myself I would never use because it was too cruel, too final. But looking at my father's hate-filled face, I knew I had no choice. I reached for the second envelope in my bag, the one I hadn't put on the table. "Okay, Dad," I said. "If you want the feds involved, let's give them the whole picture." I opened the envelope. It wasn't a financial report. It was a medical record, and it was the one thing that proved Graham Riley wasn't just a thief. It proved he was a monster. Graham Riley did not surrender. He did exactly what he promised. He declared scorched earth. The morning after the disastrous gathering at the Halbrook estate, my husband and I were served with emergency court orders. Graham had filed an ex parte motion, a legal maneuver done without the other party present, claiming that I had used undue influence, extortion, and fraudulent misrepresentation to coerce him and Celeste into signing over their assets. He painted a picture of a mentally unstable daughter who had terrified her elderly parents into submission. He demanded an immediate freeze on the trust I had created and asked the court to appoint a guardian for the property. It was a bold, desperate lie, but in the American legal system, a bold lie often buys you time. We sat in the conference room of a lawyer I had hired, using the last of our savings. His name was Saul, and he operated out of a strip mall, but he had a reputation for hating bullies. Saul looked at the mountain of filings Graham's high-priced firm had dumped on us. "They are trying to bury you in paper," Saul said, chewing on the end of a pen. "They want to drag this out until you run out of money. They know you can't afford a 2-year civil trial. They are betting you will settle and give the house back just to make it stop." I looked at Norman. He was pale, but he wasn't shaking. He had spent the night writing his affidavit, documenting every lie Graham had told him, every beer they had shared where Graham had manipulated him into signing that loan guarantee. "We aren't settling," I said, "and we aren't waiting 2 years. I opened my laptop. Graham made a mistake. He claimed in his filing that he was confused and under duress due to his age and health. He opened the door to his medical history. This was the card I had pulled from the second envelope at the party, the one I hadn't needed to use then, but absolutely needed now. "I have his medical records from his annual executive physicals," I told Saul. "My mother filed them in the cloud storage I had access to, 2 weeks ago. Graham was certified as being in peak mental and physical condition for his insurance renewal. He isn't frail, he is a shark." "That helps," Saul said. "But it is not a knockout blow. We need to prove the underlying crime. We need to prove the money laundering." "I have something better than proof," I said. "I have the guy who moved the money." This was the twist that Graham, in his arrogance, had never seen coming. In my analysis of the Laney Life accounts, I had noticed a recurring payment to a consulting firm based in New Jersey. The amounts were small, just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, but they were frequent. I had traced the firm to a man named Marcus Vane. Marcus Vane was a fixer. He was the middleman who took the cash from the charity, washed it through his accounts, and deposited it into Delaney's business as revenue. When I froze the assets 3 days ago, I also froze the automatic payments from the house account that were going to Marcus Vane. Criminals do not like it when their paychecks bounce. I had sent Marcus an email 24 hours ago. I attached the forensic map of the money trail. I told him that I was the new trustee of the Riley estate and that the money spigot was turned off. I gave him a choice: he could go down with the ship as a co-conspirator, or he could provide a sworn statement that he was acting on the explicit instructions of Graham Riley. I slid a piece of paper across the table to Saul. "Marcus Vane replied at 3 o'clock this morning," I said. "He sent us the email chain. Graham didn't just authorize the transfers. He designed the schedule. He explicitly told Vane to structure the payments to avoid IRS detection." Saul picked up the paper. He read it. A slow smile spread across his face. "This isn't just a smoking gun." Saul said, "This is a mushroom cloud." We walked into the deposition room 3 days later. The Bradford Group lawyers were there, looking expensive and bored. Graham and Celeste sat at the head of the table. They looked like victims. Celeste was wearing a modest gray dress. Graham was using a cane I had never seen him use before. "My client is frail," the lead lawyer announced. "We will be keeping this short." I sat down. I didn't open a folder. I just placed a single flash drive on the table. "We are filing a counter motion," Saul said, his voice scraping like gravel. "And we are submitting this into evidence." "What is that?" Graham asked, dropping the frail act for a second. "That is the sworn affidavit of Marcus Vane," I said. The color drained from Graham's face so fast it looked like a special effect. "Mr. Vane has agreed to cooperate with the district attorney in exchange for immunity." I lied. He hadn't gotten immunity yet. But Graham didn't know that. "He has provided the emails, Dad." "The ones where you told him to make the charity money look like sales?" Graham looked at his lawyer. The lawyer looked at the flash drive, then back at his client with the expression of a man realizing his paycheck just bounced. "Is this true?" the lawyer whispered to Graham. Graham didn't answer. He slumped in his chair. The cane fell to the floor with a clatter. He didn't pick it up. He knew, in that split second. He knew the game was not just lost. It was over. The collapse of the House of Riley happened faster than the construction. When the Holbrook family received a copy of the evidence courtesy of my delivery, they did not hesitate. There was no polite breakup. There was a press release. The Holbrook Corporation announced that they were severing all ties with the Riley family due to financial irregularities incompatible with our values. The wedding was canceled 48 hours before the rehearsal dinner. Delaney found out via a text message from Trent. I heard later that she tried to go to his house, but the security guards, the same ones who had let us in, turned her away at the gate. Her Instagram, once a shrine to her perfect life, went silent. Then, it disappeared entirely. The social media queen deactivated her account when the comments section turned into a public tribunal. But the real end came for my parents. The Asset Preservation Trust, that I had tricked them into signing, held up in court. The judge ruled that since Graham had signed it before any criminal charges were filed, and since Paige Mercer had verified his competency, the transfer was legal. I owned the house, and I did exactly what I promised. I did not move in. I did not keep it as a trophy. I initiated a liquidation sale. I sold 4,402 Oakwood Lane. I sold it to a developer who planned to tear it down and subdivide the lot. I sold the lakefront property in the Catskills. I sold the furniture. I sold the Mercedes. I used every single cent of the proceeds to pay off the debts. I paid off the $150,000 business loan that had Norman's name on it. I paid off the $50,000 in credit card debt they had racked up in my name. I paid back the charity endowment fund, every single penny, with interest, and sent the receipts to the Attorney General to show that restitution had been made. I cleaned the slate, but cleaning the slate meant wiping them out. On the day of the eviction, I sat in my car across the street. I watched as Graham and Celeste Riley walked out of the front door. They were carrying 2 suitcases. That was it. Everything else had been sold or seized. They looked old. They didn't look like the titans of Briar Ridge anymore. They looked like 2 small, frightened people who had spent their lives buying things they couldn't afford to impress people who didn't care. Graham stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked at my car. He knew I was there. He didn't wave. He didn't glare. He just looked through me, as if I were invisible again. But this time, I wasn't invisible because I was beneath him. I was invisible because I was the one writing the story, and he was just a character I had written out. Norman was sitting next to me. He reached over and took my hand. "It's done," he said. "It's done," I answered. Norman had testified. He had stood up in the deposition and admitted that he signed the guarantee. But he also provided the text messages and the call logs showing Graham's manipulation, because we paid the debt off in full. The bank dropped the potential fraud charges against him. He had lost his family. He had lost the illusion of the wealthy in-laws who would one day accept him, but he had kept his dignity, and he had kept me. We drove away from Briar Ridge. We didn't look back. 6 months later, I sat at the small kitchen table in our apartment in East Harbor. It was the same table where I had planned the takedown, but the air in the room felt different now. It felt lighter. I was looking at my credit report. The score was still recovering. It takes time to heal a wound that deep, but the red flags were gone. The past due notices were gone. The active investigations were closed. My name was mine again. We were not rich. I had used every dollar from the sale of the assets to pay the debts. I didn't keep a profit. I didn't want their money. I wanted my freedom. Norman came in from work. He smelled of grease and cold air. He kissed the top of my head and put his paycheck on the table. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest money. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at the screen, then at the window where the streetlights of our gritty, unpolished neighborhood were flickering on. "I am good," I said, and I meant it. They had called me dirt. They had meant it as an insult. They thought dirt was something you walked on, something you cleaned off your shoes before you entered the nice house, but they forgot what dirt actually is. Dirt is what remains when the fire burns out. Dirt is what holds the foundation when the storm comes. Dirt is the only thing that is real. I closed the laptop. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a scapegoat. I wasn't even a daughter anymore. I was just Genesis, and for the first time in 33 years. That was enough. In that family, they had spent a lifetime trying to bury me. They should have remembered the one rule of nature: when you bury something deep enough, and you put enough pressure on it, it doesn't die. It becomes stone, and stones do not break. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Juliet Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a big city, a quiet town, or somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments below, because I love reading about where our community is growing. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share these stories with more people who need to hear them.